Hello everybody and welcome to the 6th Google Hangout session of the Pixel Project's 4th annual International Women's Day edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. My name is Anusha Kandasivam, I'm your moderator for this session. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 12 award-winning and best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign. We aim to raise $1 million to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. Now, I'll be telling you a bit more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots of author goodies for you guys a little later in the session. Meanwhile, if you want to find out more about the Pixel Project, please do go check us out. We're at thepixelproject.net. Okay, so today we have an amazing guest. We have a live discussion and a Q&A session with New York Times and USA Today best-selling author Ann Aguirre. Before she began writing full-time, Anne was a clown, a clerk, a voice actress, and savior of stray kittens. She lives in sunny Mexico with a husband and children and various pets, and she writes all kinds of amazing genre fiction for adults and teens. Now, Anne has very generously donated some amazing goodie bundles to the stash of author goodies we have set up as perks for donors at our Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. So let me tell you about these. We basically divided them into 3 things. So the first one is book bundle 1 is the Razorland hardcover book bundle. So you get all the Razorland books. It's Enclave, Outpost, Horde, and Vanguard. These are all hardcover copies. And all the books are accompanied by signed book plates. Book bundle 2 is the Ann Aguirre YA collection. This comprises Immortal Game Trilogy, which is a hardcover, and The Queen of Bright and Shiny Things, which is also a hardcover. And this is also accompanied by signed book plates. And the third one, this is a really amazing one, is a chance to name a minor character in Anne's next book. So Anne will give one very generous donor a chance to name a minor character in her upcoming book. She will send the donor a copy of the book when it is released. And Anne has agreed, she's amazing, she has agreed to send the goodies anywhere in the world. But you have to move fast with your donation because there is only one of each type of thing. And once they're gone, they're gone. So all the funds will go towards the Pixel Project Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign to end violence against women. And I'll be telling you how you can get your hands on these amazing goodies a little later in the session and how you can help the cause and donate. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so for today, Anne is going to do a reading, and then we have a live discussion and Q&A. And you can participate in the Q&A. If you'll be watching this on YouTube, you just have to type your questions in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. This side. And you have to be signed in to YouTube to do this. That's easy. Okay, so here is Anne. Hi, Anne. So, Anne, you want to get right into the reading? I understand you're going to read an excerpt from one of your Razorland books, Outpost.
Yes, I am planning to read from Outpost. It is a scene that deals with Deuce being harassed by some really unpleasant men. And you can imagine that she handles it quite definitively. Should I get started?
Yes, please do.
Okay. This seat taken? The question came from the man I'd guessed least likely to seek my company, Gary Miles. We had tangled twice, first with his stupid joke about me, and then over his failure on watch. Consequently, he'd loathed me ever since. Miles had a rat-faced look with a long pointed nose and a non-existent chin. Graying hair fell in lank locks all the way to his shoulders, and he reeked like a bucket of vomit. None of us smelled great, granted, but he didn't even do spot washes. I didn't want him to join us, but I couldn't conceive a way to refuse without being churlish. So I said, "Suit yourself." "What are we talking about?" he asked, once he made himself comfortable. His smile showed brown-stained teeth, some broken and black at the roots. There was no way around it. The man made my skin crawl, almost as bad as the first time Fade and I came upon a freak feeding in the dark. "What we're going to do when we get our furloughs," Frank answered. Miles tightened his mouth into a bitter white line, but the look was gone before I could be sure of it, replaced with false friendliness. "Isn't it lucky you get to go so soon?" "Longshot drew for it," I pointed out. His amiability cracked. And you've got him wrapped around your little finger, don't you, puss? There's no fool like an old fool. We all saw how you stood by him, exchanging soulful glances, while we busted our ass to learning fighting techniques that we'll never even use. Surely he wasn't implying I garnered special treatment by breeding with our commander. That was disgusting. Not because Lord Longshot was old and horrible, but because he'd never do something so blatantly unjust and immoral. I eyed Miles with open dislike. He had a mind like the latrine he'd dug for punishment. Evidently, Frank came to the same conclusion because he shook his head. You're talking nonsense. It was her idea that we all get posted here, and now she struts around like she owns the place. He put a dirty hand on my thigh. It's only fair she gives a little consolation, ain't it? With my left hand, I whipped my knife from its sheath and I pricked him between the thighs. I knew exactly what I was doing when his face paled, throat working with sudden fear. Frank looked as if he feared to intervene, and well he should have. If he'd touched me, I might have castrated somebody. Leave me alone, I warned. It's out of respect for Longshot that I'm not killing you, but if you trouble me again, I will, and that's a promise. When I eased back, he scrambled to his feet. This ain't over. Yes, it is. I didn't do him the honor of watching him walk away. That would imply I thought he was worthy of my wariness. Why do you think he's so mad at you? Frank asked. Some people just need somebody to blame. But it was deeper than that for Miles, I thought. He was likely one of those men who couldn't stand for a female to do anything besides cook his food and lay down for his pleasure. If he had a partner back in Salvation, she had my sympathies. Fade put his hand on my shoulder, dropping down beside me. It was funny because Frank immediately felt the need to be elsewhere. I suppose Fade had made it clear how he felt about me when he first offended me from Miles. His face tightened with chagrin that he hadn't been here to threaten the guy again. Don't worry about it, I said. I can handle myself. Miles is going to be a problem for you, he said. I nodded. I don't think it's going away. It'd be best if Longshot replaced him, but that would send the message that giving me a hard time gets a man posted back to Salvation. Fade set his hand on my thigh, consciously erasing the memory of Miles's greasy fingers. I didn't mind. Fade had the right to touch me. But he drew his hand back before anyone could remark the familiarity, and then come at me later with evil intentions. Any idea how to discourage him? He asked. I had lots of them, all unpleasant. I might have to kill him. That made him smile. Short of that, I prefer the killing, I muttered. Then the next scene is a bit later in the book, and it's a continuation of the hostility between Gary and Deuce. She's been sent out on mission to look for Fade, who's been abducted. And unfortunately, she has been sent with the two men who hate her most. In camp, the other two were stirring. They were fixing breakfast when we arrived, just more cold camp fare. As he took a bite, Ellis made some joke about me sneaking off with Stalker, but his eyes held a covetous light. Miles stared with an ugly speculative look. I thought you had a soft spot for the other one. Aren't we risking life and limb for your pretty boy? For Frank Wilson, too. But they both knew I wouldn't have insisted on going after Frank, not if he alone had been taken. With apologies to his sister, who had been friendly to me, I wouldn't wager my life for Frank. Miles turned away with a sneer, dismissing my half-hearted words. Trouble stirred. These two wouldn't wait much longer. They didn't care about rescuing either of our men, and we were far enough into the woods for them to strike. Stalker and I ate in silence and then packed up. By tacit agreement, we didn't mention the freak we'd killed. Miles found the trail through sheer luck. He stumbled into the undergrowth to empty his bladder. There he found signs of a serious scuffle. Might have been a bobcat, but I didn't think so. The way the earth was churned made me think it had been Frank and Fade fighting for their lives. He wouldn't give up either. He's trying to get back to me. The thought offered the only brightness I could summon in this situation. I put aside the warmth that had flooded me when Stalker put his arms around me. Anyone would make me feel the same desperate gratitude, even Longshot, who was too old to be interested in breeding a girl my age. I hadn't slept well the night before, expecting any minute for freaks to attack. The one we'd found nearby only underscored the danger. That rifle shot echoed in my ear. It was unwise, certainly, to get rattled. More than ever, I needed to keep my wits about me. Otherwise, the odds of making it back to the outpost alive, let alone finding Fade, were slim. 4 or 5 participants in the fight. 2 were incapacitated and hauled off. You can see where the footprints in the earth sink deeper. They headed this way. Lead on, Ellis said. I'm more and ready for some killing. Miles said nothing, watching me with a look that made me feel dirty all the way down to the bone. I resisted the impulse to scrub my hands along my arms. He couldn't see my scars, but I touched them for reassurance. I wasn't an easy mark. If he tried, he would find me ready for a fight. With some effort, I held his gaze until he broke eye contact and fell in behind Ellis, leaving me with rear guard again, the way I preferred it. The day passed in silence, an occasional pause for hardtack and water. I chafed at the need for rest, but we had to be ready. That meant leaving ourselves something in reserve. With each step, my hope grew. I'd find Fade soon. That afternoon, everything went wrong. We stumbled out into the wood into a freak hunting party, 6 strong, rested and well fed. The tallest one screamed, and they ran at us with yellow teeth bared. The numbers wouldn't have been overwhelming if Miles hadn't turned on me with his rifle, whipped his arm around my throat, nearly overpowering me with his stench, and then dragged me back toward the trees. I kicked and fought as much as I dared, determined not to leave Stalker, to leave the freaks alone, equally determined not to let this filth hurt me. Keep it up, he snarled. This gun's got a hair trigger and it'll spatter your brain if you're not careful. It doesn't have to be like that. I can be real nice to you if you let me. In the distance, I heard sounds of battle. Ellis's rifle went off twice, then silence. Stalker called out to me, but his voice got softer the farther we moved. If Ellis managed to take 1 or 2, Stalker could finish the rest, I hope. Please be all right. To make matters worse, Miles churned up the earth as he hauled me, so if any of the freaks survived, they'd have no trouble tracking us, just as we'd been following Fade and Frank. I didn't think even a worm like you would betray his friends, I spat. Ellis needed you in that fight. Instead, you turned on me. He wedged the barrel of his gun more firmly against me. It was perfect. For once, you weren't even looking at me, my best chance to strike. His voice went dreamy. I'm going to break you down, puss. I'll spend all day on it. And when you start liking it, start liking me, I'll cut out your pretty red heart. When I make it back to the outpost, I'm going to be so sad to report your loss and that of all your friends, but I'll get credit for crying, a bona fide hero. I'll tear your throat out with my teeth. But it seemed best to feign fear, so I let a tremor run through my body and I didn't reply. Instead, I made plans, and sooner or later he had to put down his weapon. He couldn't run on me with his rifle in hand. Gary Miles was stupid. He took my submission for granted as if he'd won. I let him take my weapons. His fingers lingered, making me want to vomit. I fought the urge because he would take that as a further sign of weakness, and I needed the energy. Once I killed him, I'd see if Stalker survived, and then we'd go after Fade. If not, I'd continue alone. Silk's voice whispered, "You survived the Nassau run. You survived the long walk topside. Gary Miles can't conquer you, Huntress." She was right. My love for Fade and my fierce anger would see me through. I might not be quite as strong as Gary Miles, but my brain was better. Quietly, I bowed my head, waiting for his instructions, and he liked it from the scornful sound he made. Amused, cocky. Oh, he'd regret it. He would. "Might as well have some fun," he murmured. Then he dropped his rifle. Miles stepped closer, probably intending to do something horrible. There was no reason for him to be cautious. He'd never taken my training seriously because I didn't drill with the men. I'd fought Frank Wilson, but I didn't remember Miles being there, so he didn't know my skill. He'd only seen me fighting freaks, but they were nothing compared to his prowess, he thought. To him, I was just a girl, unarmed, alone in the woods, who was bigger and more powerful, right? Wrong. With a smile, I went for his eyes, gouging deep with my bare hands. Blinded, blood streaming, he roared and lashed out. Too slow. I wasn't there. Dancing around behind him, I kicked his leg, popping his knee out of socket. He screamed and dropped, unable to bear weight, but I wasn't through. I took out his other leg at the ankle, aiming a blow with enough force to break the bone. The snap echoed, rousing a flutter of wings above us. With bleeding eyes, unable to run, he still punched at the air, hoping to tell where I was from my movements. If he'd taken visual deprivation training as I had down in the tunnels, he might have had a shot at connecting. I slammed a fist against his temples. How many girls have you hurt? He gasped through the pain. What's it to you? Because I want to tell them personally after you're dead. I'll kill you. I don't think so. There was no point in conversation. Silk had taught me to end fights before they could turn on me. With a twist of rage, I felt sure he'd never give up their names, though I knew there had been others. Broken ones didn't stop hurting people, they fed on pain. Miles had done it silently in secret and left his victims too ashamed to whisper of it. I wished I could comfort them, but maybe his end would do that. With a cold heart, I snagged my dagger and sang it into his heart. A cleaner death than he deserved.
All right. Thanks, Anne. That was really intense. Okay. So before we go to questions, I just want to tell the audience, whoever's watching, you guys can also ask questions. So remember, you can type your questions in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen, and the chat box moderator will tell me the questions, and I'll read them out to Anne, and she'll answer them for you. Okay. So I'm going to go straight to one of our questions. Now, we just saw Deuce, who is a very strong, confident character. She has all these amazing skills, and she's pretty mentally strong as well, to have had to survive all of that. And regardless of genre, your books and stories have one thing in common. They're always led by a fantastic female protagonist, and protagonists like Siranta Jax as well. And they have agency, but they're also very human, and they're flawed as well. So my first question is, who or what are your inspirations for your female characters?
I would say that that's first a really good question. I would say that I am just constantly inspired by the women that I meet, authors and readers and activists. I mean, I think it's just absolutely tremendous what what Emma for Change is doing. She is a survivor of the Parkland shooting, and she's already got hundreds of thousands of followers, and she's a voice for gun control, and she's essentially rallying the nation behind her. And it's not hard to find teen girls like her. She is so obviously an inspiration to all YA writers. To anyone that questions that teenagers could change the world, they only have to look at social media. It's just really inspiring. And I wouldn't say that I copy real people, but I definitely look at what young people are doing in the real world, and then I will build a character that has some of the same qualities, let's say from Emma, and then, another young woman who was only 11 years old, and she started a literacy program, 1,000 Black girl books. You just have to look at the news and at social media, and it's pretty easy to build heroines because they're all over the world doing great things.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just. We have an interesting question here. So Piper J. Drake says, since we're talking about heroines, real and fictional, Piper J. Drake asks, he says, and your heroines each have different kinds of strengths. What is a unique strength or quality that you'd like to give a heroine in the future?
I think it's harder to write strong heroines who are not physically fierce, because that's the most obvious way that a woman can be strong, is if she's combat trained, she knows how to handle weapons, she can beat the snot out of anyone who disrespects her. I think it's harder to write the sort of strength in a woman who is very sure of her own mind. She will not let others take her principles from her. She will not let others disrespect her. She will not allow any of those things. And yet she can't follow it up with a roundhouse kick to the face. I mean, there's a limit to what you can do with verbal and mental resistance. So it's really a challenge to write someone who's brilliant in other ways, like maybe really technically gifted. They can do amazing things with computers. I think that I would really like to write a hacker heroine, which is something I haven't done. I think that would be pretty sweet.
Yeah, that would be quite cool. Okay, well, speaking of different kinds of heroines, now like any genre fiction, science fiction and fantasy has their share of female stereotypes and tropes. So how do you break stereotypes in science fiction and fantasy to create a female character with agency while she's dealing with the world around her, including situations that involve sexism and misogyny and violence against women and girls?
I think the most important thing in that regard is just to make sure that the story is always about her goals and achieving her dreams. And I mean, unless you have a big cast of characters and she's not the only heroine, and if there's a hero and then there's another heroine, but if you're just writing, say, first person, and she is indisputably the heroine of her own story, then it just needs to stay focused on her, and she needs to do what she needs to do, even if that means leaving someone who is very appealing to the reader. Just as an example, I can remember that there was kind of a lot of fallout in the Sarantha Jack series, because at one point, and this is a spoiler, but if you haven't read the books, they're 10 years old by this point, so
You
I'm just
should
going to
have
go
read
ahead.
them.
Yeah, if you haven't read them, then that's your fault. But basically, at one point in the series, March finds his missing nephew. He didn't even know that he had a nephew, but he finds the boy and he takes him and he's going to raise him. But Sarantha very emphatically does not want to live on a planet. She does not want to raise children. All she wants to do is travel and explore and have adventures. And I took a lot of flack for writing that, because as a woman, why does she not want to help him raise this child? That's so unwomanly. How could she not? How could she be such an awful, selfish person? But like, I just find the idea that women absolutely must be child rearing nurturers to be really obstructive to equality. I mean, would you say that to a male character? How dare you go off to space, Han Solo, and not stay home and help Princess Leia raise your children? I mean, I just don't think anyone would make that criticism.
Yeah,
So I think that making tough choices when they're right for the character, that's how you make sure that she has agency. And
yeah,
it may be critically unpopular, because sometimes your readers will want her to do something because they really love her love interest and they think he's dreamy. So how dare she abandon this tortured, adorable dude who deserves all the snuggles, and she should learn how to make pancakes just for him. I mean, like,
yeah,
it's not going to happen. At least not in my stories. I'm sure it happens in other stories.
yeah. But that's you're staying true to the character basically, because Sarantha Jack is not that kind of person, right? And we got a comment from one of the audience. Sonia Larson says, "I'm Team Belle, so I love that moment." Yeah, and yeah, actually, you kind of answered my next question. I was going to ask you whether you get any flack for not portraying female characters as unwaveringly feminine and likable and uplifting people. But women are people too. We have all kinds of different personalities and wants and needs. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I definitely have gotten some, and I have displeased some readers and made them unhappy with the choices I made for my characters. But I feel that I wrote the story as true to their characters' hearts. I wrote what they would have wanted, and I took them down the path that they would have chosen. So, I mean, I guess basically if other people want something else in a story, then they should write it.
Yeah, I guess so. Right. So keep your questions coming, guys. It's pretty fun to have questions from the fans. But meanwhile, I'm going to get to our next question. So now, and violence against women is a theme that arises at points throughout your various stories and series. And you recently did an AMA on our fantasy for us, and you stated that I think all writers need to examine their own fiction and make sure they're writing female characters with agency, not ones that exist just to give others a tragic backstory. They might also want to scrutinize all plots and require women to be brutalized before she can become a badass. Why is that necessary? Why must she be sexually assaulted or beaten in order to be strong and or angry? All that needs to stop. So that's what you wrote in your AMA. So what steps do you take to ensure that violence against women is presented realistically and effectively without falling back into a lazy trope that makes the female character suffering a vehicle for man pain?
I um I think it's easier for me to do it when I'm writing speculative fiction, because if I am building the world from the ground up, I don't have to listen to what anyone else says is realistic. Like, for instance, I have a paranormal romance series, and like essentially rape is just not a thing in that world. No man would ever do that. But, and I can say that because I'm a god, and in that world, I have built the rules and people are just better than they are in the real world. And since it's paranormal and I also have fictional creatures, you know, they can change into wolves and bears and whatnot. I mean, if you can believe someone can turn into a bear and run around, then you should also be able to believe that straight is not the default, that everyone is bisexual, and you can also believe that that sexual assault is just not a thing. Nobody would do that. So it's definitely easier because I can just like cross it off the list and say, this is not the world I want to build. I will not build this world. But when you're writing, say, a thriller and you have very bad people in it, and especially say if the thriller has anything to do with the sex trade or human trafficking, like there are just certain things that are horrendous yet true. And it's a little harder when you're writing books that do depict the real world, because you have to draw the line between, well, yes, it is realistic that this woman has suffered horribly, but I guess it, for me, the distinction comes in why you're writing that particular scene. If it's in any way titillation, then it absolutely needs to go. If it is in any way to make the man feel sad or more tortured or whatever, like then it needs to go. Um, I feel a little conflicted, at least in terms of like the woman has suffered X and now she has risen and become strong and she will get vengeance on all of her offenders, abusers, like the whole Kill Bill sort of thing. I mean, I feel like that story has been told a lot and quite adequately, so there probably needs to be more nuance to the suffering. There needs to be a better reason for it, and there also, it definitely needs to come through a female lens, because I think men writing about women who have been abused is a little a little difficult,
Yeah,
and
because
that they
they
definitely need help from women to get it right, or even close to right.
yeah,
Um,
because you can only write from your perspective, basically, or what you imagine the other person's perspective to be, which might not be correct. Okay, so my next question is about sexual consent. So sexual consent is often a blurry area in many science fiction and fantasy books. I would say mostly in YA, especially. Um, well, actually, no. In urban fantasy and YA, it happens all the time. So, do you think this is an issue that writers in these genres are tackling, or do you think it's an issue that hasn't fully been addressed yet?
Well, I also write romance, and consent is a huge issue. I just released a book called The Wolf Lord, which is the third book in the paranormal romance series that I mentioned earlier. And one of the reviews, they mentioned how pointed the consent was. These romances are so consent. There's sexy consent, and there's more consent, and then there's even more consent. I mean, they even the reviewer even mentioned a scene where the hero had turned into a black wolf in front of the heroine for the first time, and she started to touch him, and then she asked for permission, like even before touching him on the head in wolf form, she asked for permission. And he gave a little wolfish nod and said it was okay. And I really think that needs to be in all genres, not just sexual touching. I mean, like when characters are greeting one another, there are people that don't even want a handshake for whatever reason. And then, there are people that if you've been friends with them for a really long time on social media, they would love to hug you when you guys finally meet after years of chatting. But even before that, I think that people need to be asking, should we hug? Can we hug? Is that okay with you? And then not get offended if the other person says, I'm not a hugger or whatever, can we just wave and get coffee?
Mhm.
I think consent needs to be in all genres of fiction, and it needs to be predominant. It does need to be very, very clear. And definitely the other side of that is people being able to accept no. And I think that probably needs to be reflected in fiction as well. Men and women and non-binary people, they all need to be shown having their boundaries respected. And we need to see characters who don't flip out and become toxic just because they didn't get something that they wanted.
Yeah. Right.
And if they do flip out and become toxic, then they're a villain or an anti-hero or heroine. They're not a protagonist that you should be rooting for.
Mhm.
Because you shouldn't be cheering for someone who routinely violates other people's boundaries and emotional lines. And I mean, that sort of stuff is very manipulative and inappropriate.
Yeah, you're right. Sonia Larson says, I adored the consent in Wolf Lord.
Actually, I think Siona Larson is the one who wrote the review about the consent.
Wow. Okay. Okay, so on to my next question. So now, of all your series and books, Razorland is the one that has had a polarizing effect on people. Many deem it their favorite Ann Aguirre book series, and there's also a vocal subsection of readers who feel that there is some victim blaming and rape apology in the story, especially in regards to Tegan, who was raped, and there's also toxic masculinity in the form of Stalker, who is determined to wear down Deuce, though she does not seem interested in or to even understand his romantic advances. So, what are your thoughts on this? And would you have handled Tegan's storyline differently if you wrote Razorland today?
I wouldn't, and here is why. Deuce is very emotionally stunted. She doesn't have the emotional toolbox that we have as modern people. She was raised in a tunnel eating rats and mushrooms and whatever she could kill. And she didn't even hardly know how to read. The only thing she knew how to do well is fight, essentially. She was completely um, uneducated about the idea of romance. Her emotional IQ is extremely low. And um, there's no way that I could have written her with the type of understanding that I have about the issue of sexual assault, because she has no way to have that information. If I gave her that information as an author, it's not realistic considering her upbringing and her life experiences. And that was actually part of her emotional arc. She eventually apologizes to Tegan because she realizes how horribly she has wronged her and how judgmental she was. And at one point in book 4, she actually gets on her knees and begs for forgiveness. I mean, the readers can decide if that's not enough and they don't want to forgive her for being ignorant. But I wouldn't handle it differently because that's what she had. I mean, if you look at the first book, she really didn't even know Fade liked her. The readers all knew that Fade liked her, but she had no idea that any of that even existed. As far as she knew, sex was like purposeful. You did it if the population was getting low, and you didn't even do it because you wanted to. You did it because the elders put two people together and thought that they would bring viable offspring with good genes into the enclave. So, I mean, to expect a 15-year-old girl who's been raised killing monsters in a tunnel to have modern understanding of these issues, I think is pretty unrealistic. I mean, you can decide not to forgive her, and you can surely dislike the story because of the elements I included, but I think that I did the best I could with the apocalypse I had envisioned. And Stalker is absolutely a classic example of toxic masculinity. He doesn't accept no for an answer, but again, if you imagine that he has been raised in a gang, children raising children, I do not believe that children instinctively know right from wrong. I think they have to be taught, because if you actually watch 2-year-olds playing together, they will hit each other in the head with a toy, and the strongest one will keep the toy if no one intervenes. So if you imagine that they have been raised that might makes right and survival of the fittest, I mean, that's essentially the principle that prevails in the gangs. I mean, I think that the terrible things that happened to Tegan are realistic and consistent with the world I created. I in no way support or condone any of it. And Stalker was never meant to be a love interest. I mean, he wanted Deuce, but he was never going to get her. Even after she realized what he wanted, she was absolutely uninterested. And this is a spoiler, but if you haven't read the books, he was always going to die as part of his redemption arc, and it had to be for Tegan, who he had wronged. That was always going to happen. It was always part of the plan, and I never planned to save him. He was never planned to be a love interest. I felt as a writer that the only way he could atone, even though he didn't know better, the only way he could atone for the wrongs he had done was to give his life for her. That was what I thought. And, you know, people are free to disagree. They can say that that's not enough, or that I shouldn't have included a toxically masculine character. They can say that I should have written a different sort of apocalypse. Those are all valid criticisms. But I feel like I handled all of the elements that I included the best I could.
Do you have any advice about for authors who are thinking of including the issue of violence against women as a theme in their books?
Other than just be aware that it is a tough thing to tackle, and there will be people that will criticize pretty much whatever you do, even if you do your best to be delicate or to be sensitive. I didn't necessarily try to be sensitive because it didn't fit the world I had created. It just didn't. There was no way that I could have given any of our modern mores to that particular apocalyptic society. It just wouldn't be plausible.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Well, yeah.
that all speaks to um, moral relativity because things were very different in Sanctuary. They had never completely lost the reins of civilization. They went very Christian fundamentalist, but like I essentially imagined what if some Christian fundies had holed up in a town, and I tried to envision how that would go, and that's how Sanctuary was born.
Yeah. Okay.
And it was, you know, very different sort of thing, and it was different in the other towns as well that you got to see in Horde. All of the towns had different attitudes. The one that Colonel Park ran was more of a military encampment where everyone played a role in town, and I think that that makes sense, that if the world loses globalization, if all communications go down and all the settlements are isolated, then I think it makes sense that they all develop according to different ideologies, and they would have different practices. And if they were cut off long enough, it would feel like city states where completely different cultures had evolved.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that. We have a kind of related question from Sienna Larson. She asks, "Are you a writer who feels like the character comes alive and lets you know where she's going to go, sometimes surprising you, or do you control the character based on what you built of them?"
I hate to answer this because it makes me sound mentally unfit, but they're all absolutely real people in my head. And sometimes they don't even want me to write their stories. And they will not talk to me, they will not tell me things. And it will take a really hard time for me to earn their trust. And then the words will really start flowing and they will tell me their secrets. And I don't even remember what book it was, but the guy really did not want me to write his story. He was like, "I don't want you to write this book. I am a very private person." And I was like, "I can't believe I'm arguing with fictional people." And so they absolutely surprise me because I don't know anything until they tell me, and I pretty much just write the stuff down as they tell me, and I write as I go. And sometimes I try to impose control and like do an outline, but that almost never pans out. I will write it all down, then I'll be like, yes, I'm the master of this book. And then I'll write 2 chapters and I will be completely off course. And like, okay, I guess none of that makes sense. So I'll just have to keep listening and figure it out as I go.
Sienna says, "I'm a writer, so I understand this." Okay, and I was just wondering, do you get really attached to your characters, and do you feel bad when bad things happen to them?
Absolutely. I can't count the times that I will be writing a really emotionally grueling scene and I'll start to cry as I'm typing. And then sometimes I have to like tap out and go walk around and go to the bathroom and get a drink because it's just too hard, because I actually know what's coming and I'm going to kill someone that I really like, or I'm going to do something even worse, like kill one of their beloved family members. Like, you know, I'm really sorry, my dear heroine, I'm about to kill half your family in an explosion. You will never be the same. So, yeah,
Okay. Um,
it's very traumatic.
well, stories are very powerful vehicles. I mean, they make you feel emotions and make you think, and they are also vehicles of bringing about social change through dissemination of ideas. So, in your opinion, how can authors strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about things like violence against women while telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy?
That is a tough line to walk because, you know, when I first started out as a writer, I was guilty of saying, my books don't have any moral messages. I just write them to entertain. And someone very smart pointed out to me that if I wasn't consciously thinking about the messages and themes in my book, that I might be communicating stuff that I really didn't want to, that I might be passing along unknown biases or things that I haven't really ever consciously analyzed. And I was like, oh crap, you know, I really hope that I haven't written something terrible into the subtext of my book. And then after that, I would think really carefully, how is this going to make X section of the population feel? Is this going to be offensive? Is this going to be hurtful? And I've worked really hard to try and make my books as safe as they can be to, like, I mean, I know you can't make your book perfect for all readers, but I've tried really hard to excise any racial language, any ableist language. And there were a lot of things that I really had no idea could be hurtful until I started doing my checking. So I think that as long as you're really thinking and very concerned about what you're saying with your books, that that's the first step you need to take. And you just have to be sure not to carry it too far so that you're now clubbing people over the head with 42 pages of a woman complaining about how men are trash or whatever. I mean, like, you don't want to do that either. So as long as you are thinking about what you're putting out into the world and how it will impact other people, um, as long as you don't let it get bogged down with too much, what do you call it, virtue signaling in the pages, like, your character is vegan and they volunteer 40 hours a week to a charity and they donate their hair every 2 months, and like they're essentially a perfect example of what every human should aspire to be.
Yeah.
I feel like if you go that too far that way, that people will get annoyed
But
because you
then,
don't want to read about a perfect person, or at least I don't, because
yeah,
they just make me feel grumpy and inadequate. So if the character always eats perfectly balanced, nutritious meals and never forgets to work out and calls their mother 3 times a week and they're never late for an appointment, and I mean, their house is always absolutely sparkling, and they have read all of the important books written by the great philosophers, and they can quote Proust over brunch, you're like, okay, I'm done with this story.
yeah, there's got to be something wrong with a person like that, though.
They're probably secretly a serial killer.
Yeah, right, yeah. Then, okay, so do you then think that it's important for an influential author, for influential authors such as yourself, who are read all over the world, to make a conscious effort to include characters in the stories that show readers the importance of respecting women as equals and as human beings?
I do think it's very important not to write books where there's like one woman and she barely does anything. I don't know if you've ever seen Galaxy Quest.
Yeah,
You have seen it. It's a movie where the crew is almost all men, and then there's Sigourney Weaver, and her job is literally just to repeat what the computer said.
yeah.
I think it's really important not to tell that kind of a story. Um, the women need to be there needs to be multiple women in the story for sure, and they need to have important roles, and they need to do more than exist to give male characters heartbreak or
Mhm.
fun sex during the downtime. I mean,
Mhm. Is this important not just in books but in pop culture as a whole? So we're talking movies and TV and games. Do you think it's equally as important?
oh, for sure. one of the things that Black Panther did so well was it had multiple women in important roles with agency, and I have to say, I really loved Wonder Woman when it first came out, but then when I contrasted it to Black Panther, I was actually super disappointed because they paired Diana with all those men, and like they were all over the Amazon island, but hardly any of those women had an important role to play in the actual story. And like I like Steve Trevor or whatever his
Mhm.
name was, the
Yeah,
guy who died.
yeah.
Yeah, Chris Pine's character. But
Mhm.
when I looked back and I saw the way he interacted with her, like it didn't feel as empowering as I remembered when I contrasted it to Black Panther. I mean,
Mhm.
that scene where the rhino stops.
Yeah.
I'm like, I mean,
Yeah, that was
it
so
basically
cool.
does not get any better than
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I
Talk
read
about woman power.
I read this review, I can't remember where, of Wonder Woman, where the reviewer said basically Steve Trevor, or whatever his name is basically man meat with pretty eyes. And that's basically what he is. And until I read the review, I that made me think, and I thought, well, actually, yeah, he kind of is. But yeah, I totally get what you say about Black Panther because there were all these amazing women surrounding the main character as a man, but he was supported by all these amazing his mom, his sister, his love interest, the general, the warriors, and they were there because they were good at their jobs and they were the best people for their jobs, and it was that was it. And it wasn't because, oh look, here's a woman and she's a warrior, but it was they were just there because they were good at their jobs. And yeah, go on.
And we definitely do need to see more of that in pop culture. Um, it was a brilliant movie, and the other Marvel movies have a lot to live up to.
Yeah. Uh, Hyper J Drake says, "Lol." Spoiler, but I agree. The way Steve saw Diana is definitely a completely different impact than the way men see women in Black Panther. And we have a question from Regina about A Wrinkle in Time, the movie that just came out. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but she asked, "What do you think of A Wrinkle in Time in comparison with Black Panther?"
I wish that I could answer that. I was in the States not too long ago and it was out, but I didn't go see it because I wanted to watch it with my family when I came home. And then I came home to Mexico and it's not out here yet. It's not coming out until the end of March and I am so
Oh,
bummed.
oh
So
no.
I have not seen A Wrinkle in Time, but the trailer looks stupendous and I'm really excited for it because A Wrinkle in Time was one of my favorite books when I was a little girl. It was one of the first things I read that told me that it was okay to be a little strange and to
Mhm,
prefer books to people. And
mhm.
it's okay if you're smart and other people don't get you. And
Yeah.
if you don't quite fit where you're supposed to fit.
And
It
it's
was
okay
the
if you have squinkly
very,
hair and glasses. Yeah.
yeah, it told me that it was totally okay
Yeah.
not to be, um,
Yeah, like the typical pretty, sweet,
yeah,
cool girl, which a
yeah.
lot most people aren't really. I mean, I'm not. So, okay, so I have another question about geek culture. So, geek culture in general, including science fiction and fantasy, has its share of critics saying that it's still too male dominated, despite there being a rising number of prominent, well respected, and well known female authors. What do you think can be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming or books, more welcoming for women and girls?
That I really don't have an answer to because the misogyny is really deep rooted in fandom, especially. I mean, you get so many gamers who accuse you of lying when you say that you really like video games. They're like, "Sure you do. Go and play with your app. Do you play Candy Crush?" And I'm like, "No, that's not one of the games I like. I'm really into Fallout 4. I'm a good sniper." And they're like, "Sure you are." And like I can't speak to all women, but my experiences in the sci-fi fantasy fandom were not very welcoming. Um, my work was not taken seriously because I have kissing and feelings, and even in my science fiction, like there is sex, people have sex in my science fiction. It's not as long or as graphic, but I don't fade to black even in science fiction. Like there will be a page and sex is happening and then I move on. But the fandom was very like, you write girl books, Mills and Boone in space, and we don't want your kind getting your love and sex cooties all over our spaceships. And I mean, if people think that, I really don't know how I can change their minds because I write what I write, and I know a lot of women feel that their science fiction isn't given as much critical weight.
Mm.
And that is largely because we do have more emotional component. I have tried reading hard science fiction, and I found most of it so dry as to be unreadable because it will have pages and pages of technical information. And it's like, yes, I really believe that you know how to build a space shuttle, but I care absolutely not at all for any one of your cardboard people because I don't know anything about them. I don't know what they want. I don't know what they care about, except they clearly know how to build a space shuttle. I mean,
Yeah.
and so, I mean, I really don't know how it can change, except I guess as more women just refuse to be driven out, a more welcoming environment will be created with that.
And I think when people see that there is an audience for this kind of stories, there definitely is. And I mean, women read too, and of course, there are men who love these kind of stories too. So yeah, and so I think publishers should take note. It is happening in movies as well, where I mean, in just last year, I would guess that people wouldn't have thought that a movie that was just all the characters were black people would have had any audience at all. But obviously, it's doing so well all around the world. It's the box office hit, right? So yeah, maybe
I
just
think
take
that
it.
wasn't. I don't think that wasn't news to anyone except
Except
maybe
yeah,
Hollywood executives. Everyone else in the world has been waiting for this for a really long time.
yeah,
But the success is really great because it's a watershed moment in film history between like the comedy with Queen Latifah. I think it was called Girls Night Out,
yeah, yeah.
maybe
That's
Girls
it.
Trip.
Girls
I
Trip,
don't I
Girls
don't
Trip. That's it. Girls
Girls
Trip.
Trip. It was
Yeah,
Girls Trip. That one did really well. Get Out did really well. Black Panther has completely dominated. Um, hopefully that means that we're gonna get to see a lot more interesting and varied projects coming from Hollywood. At least I have my fingers crossed for that
yeah,
because I loved all three of those movies.
yeah. I think we all do. We have another question from Sienna Larson, who says she's changing the script a little, but what's your favorite flaw to write in a heroine?
Favorite flaw? Um, I think probably I really enjoy writing a woman who seems very cold for
Mm,
various reasons. Like she comes across as an ice queen, but she actually has a lot of love to give. She's just never allowed herself to do that for whatever reason. Like maybe she's been hurt in the past, or she has a dark secret that if it came out, it could possibly ruin her relationship or her life. Um,
is
I
that a
think
flaw
Ice
though?
Queen.
Isn't that just like a personality? Would that be a
I
flaw?
don't know. I mean, I feel like if you're too cold, that is kind of a flaw. If
Okay.
you push people away continually and you won't allow them to get to know you and you don't make friends, and I mean, I would say that's a flaw because who can live in the world alone?
Yeah. True.
You
Okay.
need friends, you need someone to listen to you when you're having a hard time. And if you can't accept any of that, I do think that's a flaw.
Okay, so keep your questions coming, guys. I'm going to move on to another one. So let's see. And you're a parent, your mom. Parents are usually the most influential role models in a person's life. So, as a mother yourself, what do you think parents can do to help prevent violence against women and girls in future generations and get the boys involved in helping to do so?
Well, I think the most important thing is shifting the focus of rape culture because up till now, it's been teaching girls how to avoid getting raped, and that's so backward. I mean, when you think about it, you're telling your 10-year-old, okay, if anyone touches you inappropriately, this is what you should do, and don't be afraid, and blah, blah, blah. But really, we should all be having conversations with our sons and telling them no matter how pretty you think she is, you absolutely do not have the right to touch her without permission. And you do not have the right to get angry if she doesn't like you or if she doesn't respond when you flirt with her. What we need to be doing is educating our boys so as to eradicate the cult of toxic masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's terrible that little girls grow up in fear and boys are like almost given a free pass. Because if you look at how difficult it is to get a rape conviction, I mean, look at that swimmer, Brock Turner, was it? He
Yeah.
was raping a girl in an alley and he basically got off with a slap on the wrist, and everyone talked about how she shouldn't have gotten so drunk, or she shouldn't have been wearing that lipstick, or she shouldn't have been wearing that skirt. But no matter how much someone has to drink or what they're wearing, it's not their fault. It's whoever did an
Did it.
inappropriate thing.
Yeah.
So, and that's not to say that it's only boys that can do harm. I mean, girls also need to be taught, and non binary people need to be taught as small children that it's never okay to do things without someone's permission.
Mhm. Yeah, just recently read an article about Terry Crews who just came out about being sexually assaulted as well, and men do get sexually assaulted by men and by women. So it can happen to everybody, and yeah. Um, we have a very strange question from Piper J Drake. Going back to when we were talking about Black Panther. Because I love the rhino scene. Do you want to meet a rhino now? I don't know what Piper is thinking of, but okay.
I really do not want to meet a rhino because I have heard they're extremely dangerous and that they are very prone to trampling people.
Yeah.
So I can live with just seeing them in pictures and like in a movie, perhaps. I have no desire to see one or pet one or be stomped by one.
They do look really cute in the movie though, but I'm sure they are very dangerous. Um, okay, so now we were just talking about okay, sorry. Before asking my question, I'm going to ask one from Fiona Larson. Fiona says, I don't know if there is a question in this so much, but I have noticed that you do tend to write stories that are respectful to non-sexual romantic relationships, and as an asexual, I find that nice. Do you do this kind of? Did you include those kind of relationships on purpose?
Well, I definitely did it on purpose with Jax and Vel because Vel is a giant praying mantis and he does not have a human sex drive, and he also does not have equivalent human sex organs. So their relationship, I wouldn't say it was aromantic because I do think that there was definitely love between them, but it wasn't sexual love because Vel can't want to bang Sarantha. He just can't. He doesn't have that he doesn't have that drive.
Mm-hmm.
The way his species reproduces is fairly clinical, and it's more from like a sort of intellectual desire to have progeny. Like, I would like to continue my line. It's not, I greatly desire you, therefore I will climb upon your thorax and deposit my seminal fluid into your egg sacs using my ovipositor. I mean,
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. But I mean, which kind of gets goes into my next question, which is as an author and as a female author, do you think it's important for you to portray examples of healthy, respectful relationships in your novels between men and women, not necessarily sexual, and also between women? And do you think it's important for stories that prominently feature women to pass the Bechdel test, where women talk to each other about something other than a man?
oh, for sure. I definitely believe in the importance of sisterhood and brotherhood. I think that people need to have friends. They need to have very warm relationships and a support network. Sometimes it's difficult to write that just from a technical perspective, because if you have a character who has 22 best friends, it's hard to move the story forward if they have 22 friends that they're constantly chatting with about nothing that is related to the book. So you have to streamline and just maybe give them a couple of very close friends who get actual page time, and then maybe others are mentioned just to show that this character is a social being and doesn't exist alone in a yurt while doing nothing interactive with other humans.
Okay. I, you know, we've been chatting for about an hour already. Time has gone by so fast. I'm gonna ask my last question, and then we'll wrap up. So now, Anne, you've been incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. Now, this is a bit of an obvious question, but could you tell us why you support the cause to end violence against women, and in your opinion, how can authors like yourself best support efforts to kick off social change to end violence against women?
I think just be aware of what you're reading and what the messages are in the books that that you're supporting. And if it's something that you wouldn't have noticed, like a character has been fridged, which means a woman is killed so that a man can suffer and have a tragic backstory, maybe don't support that kind of fiction. Buy something that's more nuanced and doesn't perpetuate the problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, so why do you support the cause to end violence against women?
Because it's the right thing to do. It's something everyone should be doing. There should be no violence against anyone, in my opinion, but definitely not against women.
Okay, thanks, Anne, and thank you everybody for asking your questions. Now, I'm going to switch the screen to me. Hi, everybody. Now, I promised you earlier that I would tell you about the author goodies that we're giving away. So, as I mentioned, Anne has generously donated some really cool goodies, and there are three separate things that you can get. The first thing is a book bundle, which is the Razorland hardcover book bundle, which comprises Enclave, Outpost, Horde, and Vanguard. And this book bundle is accompanied by signed bookplates. And then the book bundle 2 is the Ann Aguirre YA collection, which is the Immortal Game trilogy, which is hardcover, and the Queen of Bright and Shiny Things, which is also hardcover. And the third thing is a chance to become a minor character in Anne's next book. This is a really amazing perk. So Anne is going to give one very generous donor a chance to name a minor character in her upcoming book, and she will send the donor a copy of the book when it is released. Now, do read the terms and conditions so you know exactly what this involves. And yeah, so will send the goodies anywhere in the world. But you have to move fast because there is only one of each type of thing. So go there quickly and get your hands on them. Okay, so I'm going to share with you guys a little slide to show you where you can go. Okay, there it is. So go to our Rally Up page. Everything is there. All you have to do to donate is go to is.gd/R4P Rally Up IWD 2018. That is, link is case sensitive, but I think our chat box moderators are going to put the link in the chat box as well, so you can just click there and go to our Rally Up page and see all the goodies there. Now, besides Ann's amazing goodies, we have plenty of other author goodies available, including from Lee Badrugo, Lauren Oliver, Molly Harper, Lynn Llewellyn, Karen Rose, Elliot de Bodard, Kimberly Derting, Jacqueline Clary, and so many more. And new goodies are going to be released every week, as well as as the campaign gets underway. And if you want to learn more about our Read for Pixels sessions that we have coming up soon, go to is.gd/Read for Pixels. You can see the schedule of all the authors that are coming up next. So please do give generously. All funds go towards raising $1 million for the Pixel Project Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign to help end violence against women. And if you want to find out more about the Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign and about violence against women and what you can do to help end it, do visit the Pixel Project's website at thepixelproject.net. Okay, so hopefully I'm back on screen now. Okay, so Anne, I think Anne has some announcements to make. I'm going to switch the screen back to you. Oh, you've moved.
Yeah, I had to move. My computer was telling me my battery was almost out, and I was afraid it was going to shut down on me before I got back. So while you were talking, I ran over and plugged in.
Oh, okay, cool. Well done. Okay, yeah, so you have some announcements for the fans.
I did want to mention that if you are interested at all in young adult science fiction or space opera, you might want to check out Honor Among Thieves, which I co-wrote with the amazing Rachel Kane, and that came out in February. It's a really tremendous book. I'm very proud of it, and it definitely has a strong, powerful heroine and a very unique love story because the love interest is a sentient space whale.
A sentient space whale.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, go and read that, guys. So that sounds really interesting. Okay, well, all that's left for me to do is to say thank you. Thank you so much to Ann Aguirre for being with us and supporting the cause to end violence against women. And thank you guys for asking your questions. We had a really good time. So thanks and good night or good day wherever you are in the world. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.